We're really honored to have you here today and to share some insights for the venture capital and private equity industry.
Sophie, it's great to be here with you.
And so our first question would be, what does a typical workday look like for new graduates starting out in a VC/PE firm, and how will it differ as the career path progresses?
For Selena, so one of the things that I will be direct with you, I did not realize early on, and it took me some time in deal making, in merger and acquisitions, and then also working with a family office and doing some private equity and venture capital transactions to realize is that private equity and venture capital, from my perspective, is like any business out there. And here's what that means. It's different than any business out there, meaning any company works and ticks and lives differently than some other company. If you think about a business that might be a food manufacturing business and compare it to another food manufacturing business, they're always going to be different in terms of their actual financial performance, their financial results, what's on their balance sheet. How is their business model driven? Is it, let's say, a sales-driven model, a product-driven model, etc.? So where I'm going with this is private equity and venture capital is like other businesses in that one private equity firm is going to be different from another private equity firm. Same as saying, is this widget company going to be exactly the same as another widget company? No. So a private equity firm or a venture capital firm is effectively one of the structures out there that smart, enterprising people with great experience in deal making, with great experience of identifying businesses, maybe growing and improving businesses, and then exiting businesses have set up. And then normally it's people who drive it. Normally it's people who are principals, founders, managing directors, whatever, of the company, who have set it up in a certain way to run a thesis, to run a particular strategy, to get capital into their structure, deploy that capital, get some interesting investments, manage those investments, exit and realize for the investors. What I'm suggesting is, depending on who those people are, depending on what their backgrounds are, depending on what the strategy is, how the firm and how that business of private equity and venture capital investing will run will be different. I thought it would be very important to you and to your team to know and realize this as some context, and then I'll share a little bit more. Regarding then what are some new graduates face, right? So as I mentioned, it depends on the firm, depends on how they run their strategy, depends on what they're doing. However, what is going to be the same and equal in most cases is if we're talking about new grads coming out of undergrad as an example, that just means the folks are likely to have less experience. They're likely to have seen probably less businesses than if they had more experience and if they were starting in more senior roles. So what that means is they're just less probably knowledgeable of, one, how the business setting and how the business world works. What is professional work like? Two, they're new to the industry and they're new to the firm, so they don't know how that particular firm works, how its culture, how that business model I mentioned and looking after a particular thesis works. And then thirdly, yes, there's some specific tactical skills and knowledge that maybe isn't developed yet that they will need to develop. So as a result, they will be part of that machine, part of that business, and hopefully more cohesively and in a more friendly and amicable way included into that model, but they would be asked to do things they're able to do, which normally means to learn and do bits and pieces of what other people, more senior people, need them to do. And what does that mean in a private equity firm, private equity model, or venture capital model? That means some bits and pieces, some things to learn and some things to progress that result in somehow looking for businesses, buying or investing in businesses, managing businesses, or exiting in businesses. So breaking that down further, that means some analytical skills will be likely at use in terms of understanding businesses, understanding industries, and perhaps creating some understanding for the more senior folks of what those businesses are all about. So all of that basically says research, modeling, calculations of different kinds, whether that's accounting or financial modeling, and on one end, right? On the other end, that may mean presentations and preparation of materials for more senior people, right? So first analyzing, then helping prepare some materials, either bits and pieces of those or full product and full materials. What else is missing in there? Well, talking to people. Who is a junior person in the middle, right? 1, 2, 3. So who is a junior person working in a private equity or venture capital firm? Who are they interacting with? Are they exclusively interacting with the team members at that private equity firm, venture capital firm, or are they dealing with some external stakeholders? What does that mean? Who are the external stakeholders in a private equity venture capital setting? That's either businesses that they're reviewing for potential investment, or it's their existing portfolio companies whom they're managing, overseeing, working to improve, or maybe this is some parties that are looking to invest, or that the private equity venture capital firms are soliciting to invest into whatever their structure is, whether it's a fund-based structure or another kind of vehicle of vehicles, right? So I would say analytical, presentation, communications of different kinds would be the core and important skills. And then obviously the more experience the new starts have, and the more they show aptitude, capability, and the more they show that they're capable, and the more there's opportunity and desire for that from the team members of the firm, the more opportunity and responsibilities they will be given.
Thank you so much for being so in depth about everything. And speaking of progression, we would also like to ask you to give us a brief self-introduction about your background in venture capitalist or private equity and how you got to where you are today.
Sure, Selena, and you're welcome and happy to share a little bit about myself. I finished the University of Toronto. I finished the program that's now called Rotman Commerce. I was, and I still am, an immigrant to Canada, so a person who wasn't born here, was born elsewhere, finished part of my studies, university studies in Russia, then moved over to Canada and completed studies here. Then after third year, I started working in mergers and acquisitions and have been working in deal making and in business since then, while all my other studies and the rest of my education has been acquired while working. And so that included finishing my degree at U of T, getting my CFA charter, becoming a chartered financial analyst, and then also becoming a Harvard Business School alumnus and a graduate and degree holder of Global Professional Master of Laws at the University of Toronto Law School. So that's on the educational front. As far as work is concerned, like I mentioned, started working after third year, and then was excited about the field of finance, merger and acquisition specifically, and delved right in with a summer job. And then that continued into my fourth year as I was studying, joined another firm afterwards, and then became the special projects person who would be doing the most complicated merger and acquisitions, selling businesses, buying businesses, would work with businesses as their external corporate development team member, effectively helping them expand, roll up industries, build new facilities, and create new projects as effectively their financial advisor or part of a team of trusted financial advisors. And also quickly got into even more complicated things, which were carve-outs, piecing up businesses, selling a smaller piece, selling a larger piece, helping the previous firm raise debt, raise equity, working with ultra high net worth families and individuals and acquiring businesses with them and for them. And then also was on a project that was a restructuring of a significant venture capital fund. All of this to say that I was able to acquire a wealth of deal types and deal experiences unparalleled, I think, to most people I know, and extremely grateful and fortunate about that. And also then I was able to learn a lot of industries by doing deals in food and in healthcare, in financial services, in business services, construction, building products, telecom, entertainment. Those were some of the industries where I've either completed transactions or where transactions were attempted. And what you must know is not every transaction that is started is finished, right? Deals have a life of their own, and it takes a long time and also a lot of work and effort, and a lot of things need to come together for a deal to be successful. So all of this to say is I had a pretty diverse and broad background of types of deals, industries, types of companies at a very entrepreneurial firm. And then I started Semper8, the firm that you mentioned earlier, and started the Semper8 Capital side of the business first, where we started doing mergers and acquisitions and also work with ultra high net worth individuals and family offices, helping them acquire businesses, helping them buy businesses, and also helping them manage such companies. So then it further evolved into having projects with businesses and these wealthy families. That meant having projects that are effectively private equity and venture capital projects. And also during the pandemic, went on to include us starting our own entrepreneurial ventures, starting Semper8 Health and becoming co-founders with life sciences and healthcare entrepreneurs in several of their initiatives, and then also starting a media business, which includes us having a proprietary library of more than 80 concepts and working with directors, producers, and some of these concepts have generated interest in Hollywood, which is exciting. And then also looking to link some of these verticals, link capital, health, and media, including through a platform, a digital platform we're going to develop to help the world with some of the mental health problems that the world is experiencing amidst this pandemic. I'm a big believer in something that I call work-life synergy, which is making sure that when people are involved in their work, involved in their personal lives, instead of creating separations and creating different buckets and seeing how those buckets may compete against each other or how they might get more or less attention, seeing how one could be impactful in their work life such that they have enjoyment and there's some positive spillovers as opposed to negative spillovers that people normally talk about into the personal life, and vice versa, some of the things people do in their personal time, how that might benefit their development, how that might develop their strengths, which will also benefit their work life. And that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate the work-life synergy model as well. And through a wealth of very diverse experiences, speaking of the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as you seeing patterns and kind of the deals that you're making, can you share your outlook on the industry and what are some of the emerging trends within venture capitalist or private equity?
We could look at a lot of trends if we wanted to, and we could also segment the industry very many different ways, but I'll talk at the very high level. Going back to, again, I'm going to share this once more regarding what is private equity, but in a slightly different way. So private equity is raising money, buying businesses or investing in businesses, managing them or overseeing them somehow, hopefully creating value either through the fact that you've picked the right ones or actually working with them to make them better, and then exiting to actually realize on the investment that was made at the outset. At every stage, whether it's fundraising or investments, or it's exits of the companies, or how much is still available to go through this process, right? And we call that dry powder. So really, I'm touching on three aspects of this process. In each one of them, according to the data that was gathered, I believe, by Bain Capital or Bain, the consulting firm, one of the two, according to those folks, from 2011 to 2021, there's been an increase from somewhere between 2.5 times to in excess of 3 times, right? So 2.5 or 3 or more than 3 times more fundraising, more transactions, more capital still available for transactions, more exits. So this is just to say that the industry continues to grow, at least so far, continues to attract more attention. What is happening as far as the trends given the coronavirus pandemic? Well, the coronavirus pandemic has seen a very significant injection of capital into the system that the governments have provided to battle battle the pandemic and battle the crisis. That has elevated some of the stock market prices. And as a result, there's been somewhat more flow of capital than normally into the public markets. So that is creating a bit of a challenge for private equity in terms of, will private equity be able, and venture capital be able to show returns that might be similar to public equities. So so one is big, right? Lots more growth and seems to be growing very significantly. Two is there's some challenges in the returns relative to other asset classes. Three is certainly there is a continued development of specialization. Back, let's say 18, 20 years ago, it was still pretty conventional to do some financial engineering, buy a company, manage it relatively well, exit by virtue of financial engineering, meaning increasing the return to equity by virtue of having a greater return on equity than the cost of capital that was being paid to the debt holders, right? So on financial engineering only, creating returns. Now that's not really easily available anymore. Why? There's more capital chasing a certain amount of deals than there was. So the deals have become more expensive. And as a result, it's tougher to go into deals at low enough, cheap enough valuations. Hence, it's tougher to create the kinds of returns that people want. How do you create returns if you're going in at higher valuations and then you have a risk as to what valuations you'll exit at? Well, remember this process I talked about, right? That means, where is the opportunity? The opportunity is to create more value while overseeing and managing these investments. If that is the case, how can you do that? You can do that by spending more time on managing them, having separate teams that do that. You can also do that by having specialized teams who deal with the specific industries. Oh, by the way, that can also help getting into the right businesses and choosing them better, even if you're maybe overpaying, but choose them better if you know the industry. Long way of saying there's now more focus on industry specialization or specific asset class specialization in the alternatives industry and the private equity venture capital industry. And also there's more focus on managing the assets. Lastly, we're all experiencing a greater digitization as a result of the pandemic in a variety of industries, and private equity and venture capital is going to be part of that trend in my view, partly directly as far as the fund managers and the businesses that are private equity and venture capital investors, and also through greater digitization within their portfolios.
That was very helpful. Thank you so much. And yeah, I'm sure if anybody has any specific questions about these 4 specific areas, you can leave in the chat box, or we can wait for the Q&A session at the end. And
Sure.
so kind of moving on from just industry specific questions, what are some of the skills, programs, features, characteristics, or anything like that that a venture capitalist or private equity firm is looking for in a new hire? And do you have any tips for students who want to pursue this particular area?
Right. The kinds of things that we talked about were analytical. They were linked to presentations and various materials, and they were linked to communications and having dialogue with a variety of stakeholders. So ultimately, being as good as possible at all of those things is what people will be looking for, right? They're looking for whatever they can immediately use as much as possible as people begin working with their organizations, as well as they're looking for aptitude, for capabilities to learn, improve, be better, and be that much more impactful in their roles. So definitely analytical mindset and attention to detail is important. Research skills are important in that first bucket. Being able to work with professional documents, with Word, with PowerPoint, which are basic suite of Microsoft products, and the equivalents that might exist on other platforms is key. And being able to provide something that is both, like I mentioned, analytically sound, but then on top of that, additionally, is appealing and pleasant, and something that people will enjoy reviewing and get the information from promptly and efficiently as they're perusing perhaps the documents which the junior staff members have been able to help prepare. And then lastly, on the communication side, obviously interpersonal skills, communication skills, good writing, good speaking, being able to deliver points clearly and concisely is important. And it's ultimately all for me. What is the objective? Where is this benefiting? All the things that we talk about, if people are thinking, how can they benefit? How can they can be a good employee, collaborator, maybe future partner? All of that is what they should be thinking about, and thinking about illustrating to their potential employers, right? So if people understand where the industry trends that are heading, right, then they could be thoughtful about communicating how they could be adding value while those industry trends are impacting the players in the industry, which we talked about as an example. We talked about digitization. So some of the folks coming out of school, they might be more digitally savvy than maybe some folks that have been in the workforce for a longer period of time. That's great. If people are thinking about the specialization of private equity venture capital managers, then folks coming into a particular industry or subset, right, of the private equity and venture capital industry. So let's say a private equity firm is targeting food. If you know something about the food industry, if you've been reading articles, you've been studying about it, they'll probably appreciate it. And I suppose in terms of getting better returns, we talked about that trend. Well, ultimately, what is private equity venture capital? It's investors. It is being able to choose the right trends, the right companies, commit to them. So the more people are honing their investor skills, I'm not suggesting people necessarily invest real money, which some people may, but I'm not suggesting people taking any specific positions or risks, not knowing their objectives, their constraints, their financial situation. But people could be just playing with, fake money, meaning pretending they're doing investing, right? And record keeping in Excel or somewhere. Okay, here on this date, I think I will have invested into this particular stock. Why? Because I've analyzed the company, and this is what I think about this business, this industry, and this is what I think about this particular valuation, right? But this is what's important for success in the private equity venture capital industry long term, is people actually being good investors or being good partners to good investors, right? So either people need to be the ones who are picking the right opportunities, private opportunities in this case, and private equity and venture capital, right? Or they need to be those people who can help those who have that knowledge and insight and experience, again, either get capital or do deals or better manage deals or better exit deals.
Thank you. That's actually very helpful and gives me a lot of things that we can prepare. But also on the educational side, I know that a lot of the listeners today are actually also part of the Rotman Commerce program. So is there anything about your education, whether that was in Rotman Commerce, a UFT Law School, or your time at Harvard Business School, that you think especially stands out in helping you prepare for a career in venture capitalist or private equity?
I suppose what people don't get a lot of and don't get enough of, or they don't think it's applicable enough, is accounting. Let's go there. So a lot of people who are heading into finance, who want to be in private equity venture capital, they think they need finance courses, they need math courses, they need to be great, with models and research, which is all the things that are very important. But actually, I guess your question helps bring forward an important point, which is a lot of those people don't understand the importance of accounting, don't take enough accounting, but accounting really is the language of business. And it is key and crucial to anybody in any business role, anybody who wants to advance, who wants to be an executive, and definitely to anybody who wants to be an investor. That is certainly so helpful in understanding the information that businesses provide and understanding companies before or in addition to doing additional research and having conversations with them. So I would say that doing more accounting and being better at accounting than I think an average person going into finance was helpful to me. I think if we talk about Harvard Business School, I think what was a very important part of that was definitely the education, definitely the courses, definitely interactions with stellar and best in the world professors. I think the other piece that was really important there, and I think is important for anybody in an educational setting, is the kinds of people one meets and the kinds of people one forms a connection with. So in this case, you folks here who are running ETC, you folks perhaps who are involved in different roles and are meeting each other as a community. That's so important because it helps you develop some of your administrative, organizational, social, etc. skills, and hopefully creates bonds and relationships that you'll be able to carry forward into your social, professional, both hopefully, remember work-life synergy, right, lives. So that's very important. Speaking about the Global Professional Master of Laws and the University of Toronto Faculty of Law and legal programs in general, I think that as it applies to private equity and venture capital, certainly looking at businesses, certainly analyzing them and seeing the potential and the strategic value of their business plans, their ambitions, their visions is important, but it is also extremely important to be thoughtful and mindful of the risks, mindful of the risks that are business risks, legal risks, regulatory risks. To me, it's an important element of the overall deal making and also investing skill set, where ultimately deal making and investing is a lot about numbers. It's a lot about legal aspects and risks. It's a lot about strategy, innovation, vision. And then lastly, I round those three things that could be three boxes. I draw a circle around them, which is psychology, human psychology. We're all people who are all either running businesses, advising businesses, investing in businesses, and it's very important to not forget the human element.
And so for a new graduate or someone like in the undergraduate program entering the venture capitalist or private equity industry, what does their career path typically look like, and where will they see themselves in a few years?
Well, I think it really depends on where they enter, how well they perform, and what they want to do and what the firm wants to do. So people who are entering the workforce, they think in terms of titles and in terms of position names. So somebody is an analyst, somebody is an associate, somebody is a senior, so somebody's a principal, somebody's a partner. A lot of people who are my close contacts, friends, myself, a lot of people I know professionally who are senior folks or somewhat senior, experienced, whatever, folks in the industry, we normally think in terms of responsibilities and what degree of influence and impact people are able to make. Here's where I'm going with this. If I said, first you're going to be an analyst, then you're going to be an associate, then you're going to be a principal, that might be the case for a lot of firms. But does it really matter? I would argue not so much. What I would argue really matters is what are people doing, right? What are they learning? How are they creating impact for others and for themselves? So really, to me, in the private equity and venture capital industry, this is about going from learning and doing bits and pieces to doing more and more together for others or with others, and then being able to do whole bits and pieces of, let's say, an investment process or an oversight of the company, right? Then being able to do more and more of these pieces of the process, and then ultimately being somebody who is able to either do the whole thing themselves that they really wanted to, or manage other people who are doing the things. I know I'm speaking generically, but hopefully it makes sense to folks, right? From doing bits and pieces of these analyses and models and presentations, right? To, oh, can you do the whole thing? But this presentation ultimately fits into a process of evaluating how to buy a company. Could you do that whole thing yourself? Oh, could you also help raise the money for the fund? Could you manage people who do this? Could you manage a whole firm who's doing that? So really, I would argue that it is helpful to think about that kind of a progression of what people are able to do, what they know, who they're interacting with, how they're making impact, as opposed to just what are the roles, right? And I think it's helpful to align that, think back to work-life synergy, align that to who people want to be, right? What people want to be doing to be making impact in the world, and how a particular firm's structure and progression, how that fits to how people want to progress as professionals, how they want to progress as individuals.
Thank you so much for that in-depth analysis. And also, just before we move into the Q&A section, if you enjoyed today's event, here are some of our social media platforms for ETC that you can be on the lookout for future events, and as well as future recruiting opportunities. And yeah, now moving into the Q&A section. If you have any, I saw that before someone had left a
Yes, Kurt has left a question. So Kurt is saying, hi, Boris. Hi, Kurt. I'm wondering if there are any new technologies showing up recently and applying to the VCP firms. So it would be good if Kurt is able to go maybe on camera, and if we can have a little bit of a dialogue and Kurt could clarify a little bit more about the question, because I'm understanding it in one way, but perhaps Kurt meant it in a slightly different way. There's always technologies for sure that are being brought into the world in general. The world is evolving. More technology is being used by private equity firms for finding deals, assessing deals, managing their companies. But admittedly, more technology is being used in the portfolio companies, a little bit less in the actual investment management process, where the more efficient something is, the more you can standardize something, the easier it is to apply technology to it. And both in reality, the private equity venture capital process is somewhat custom. And then people in it often think it is more custom than it really is too. So there is a bit less of what I would consider as huge technology innovations by the actual private equity and venture capital firms. But like I said, certainly in the businesses as well. And if that's what Kurt was wondering about, then that's great. If not, Kurt, please share more.
Yeah, no, thank you. That you just answered my questions. I think there's someone else also raised a hand, but yeah, that's what I was asking for. Like, I was thinking if there are any big innovations happening during the pandemic or probably after pandemic that could apply to the industry. But like you said, there's no like a huge jump on the innovation part. But they're just integrating the technologies more and more when the time goes on. So yeah, thank you for your answer.
You're very welcome, Kurt, and you're absolutely right. I guess let me add one thing, that if we were to look for what I think, and I'm aware of somewhat broadly as technologies being used, it's certainly one example is data rooms, right? So when people are doing due diligence, it used to be that these would be reams of documents that somebody would ship over across the world and would look at, to then, okay, it's electronic files, right? And you're going, Boris, what age are you from? Shipping documents around. When were there are no electronic files? But yes, there is such an age. But then it's data rooms, right? Organized. You have, Dropbox. Some people are using something as simple as that, but there's specific data sites like Intralinks and Merrill and others who have good technological platforms for seeing what documents people are seeing, tracking who's seeing what. There's certainly tools that people are using internally for better tracking their research, for better tracking their communication, basically CRMs, right? They didn't used to be CRMs, people would have Excel files. Now people have more and more sophisticated CRMs. People are certainly using more and more tools and more GUIs of different kinds, right? Graphical user interfaces, different programs for how they're representing the assets in their portfolio. We have this many investments. How are they doing? Let's put some pie charts. Let's maybe show it to the fund investors immediately that they can log into our platform, as opposed to spending a lot of time creating a new presentation. So I think these things are happening, but like I mentioned, for me, it just seems like, yes, they're helpful, but they don't go to the heart of the investing process. There are some visionaries thinking that they will standardize and add AI and machine learning to venture capital investing and then private equity investing. And I think those things will happen, but I think that's a very, very small subset of the innovators, Kurt.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, because my background is chemical engineering with data science and machine learning. So I believe that machine learning and AI will definitely help this industry. Well, it could help many industries, including venture capital and private equity, but it's definitely not the heart of this industry because we try to use the tools to help you visualize the data and try to be more persuasive on the investor side. But it also depends on how you understand the project and industries, instead of just using the machine learning to tell people this is what machine tells us to do and just go invest on this stock or go invest on these projects. I definitely agree with you on that part. Thanks for sharing. Yeah.
In private equity and venture capital, I would argue it's different than using machine learning or AI for, let's say, equities investing. But even in equities investing, what is AI and machine learning? Do you actually set off a machine learning engine and let it run free? Or is it an AI machine learning that's being controlled? But that's a whole other discussion. But in theory, that's where the space could be heading. The space thinks, and I think somewhat correctly, that it's probably not the first place where this will be introduced, right, and be used.
Thanks for connecting.
Kurt. You're welcome. I see Dhruv has a hand up.
Hi, Boris.
Hi, Dhruv.
Thank you so much for your answers today. They've been really insightful.
You're welcome.
I was really interested by the new vertical you mentioned of Semper8 Media, which, as you mentioned, already has a proprietary library of over 80 film and TV concepts. My question was, how do you find these TV and film concepts? And I was wondering if you had considered alternative sources of ideas. Like, for example, I know of Wattpad, which is an online platform for publishing fiction. And that could be another costless way of sourcing materials that have already resonated with audiences. So yeah, my question is, like, if you could talk more about Semper8 Media and where you found your TV and film concepts so far.
Dhruv, thank you for asking the question. And you are correct in that is the library that we have, and it keeps growing. You're also correct about Wattpad and what Wattpad is doing, and I'm very familiar with that business and the transaction they did with a Korean investor earlier in the year. I think to answer your first question, it is somewhat different than I suppose you expect in terms of how we're finding them, because we're creating them. So far, all of these projects are the ones that we have created. And my co-founder in that business, the president of Semper8 Media, Anastasia Goroshkova, she actually is the one who wrote all of those concepts, authored all of those concepts. Wow. And so she is a genius, prolific writer who writes extremely fast, very thoughtfully, and also very smartly. And so that's how we've accumulated this library so far. But this is not to say that we won't be open, which we are very open to collaborating with people who have interesting ideas, interesting concepts, projects at different stages of development, where we might be able to add value to them and they might be able to add value to us. In fact, we've had 3 projects so far that have had interest in Semper8 and in Semper8 Media and have approached us and said, do you want us to basically join you and join your library? So that's a little bit of context on Semper8 Media, and we're very excited about the kinds of dialogue we're already having in Hollywood, some of the dialogue we're opening up in other film markets. And if anybody here on this call is involved with any particular film markets, film producers, film investors, would be interesting to hear. And like I said, always open for discussions and collaborations. Then the second part of the question is sourcing content from platforms like Wattpad. Definitely, there's opportunity for that. Having said that, to my knowledge, what platforms like that do is they actually want to accumulate that content on the platform, and then they want to be the stewards and liaisons for that content. And in fact, Wattpad, especially with the transaction they did with the Korean company, I think they either have or will have capabilities to then steer the content they have in the kind of direction they'd like to steer it in. I think there's certainly partnerships and partnership opportunities that are available between folks like ourselves on the Semper8 Media side, effectively a new production company. So there's definitely partnerships that they will likely be forging with folks like ourselves or with folks that are big studios. I think that it will be going forward with content, I think it will be a question of just who can get the best possible content out there. And it's going to be a mix of having the content, having the business knowledge and skills and acumen, and then having a capability to actually operationally produce films. And so same as in the private equity world, there's going to be different platforms and different models who are going to be doing differently, and different people will partner up with different people. And so we'll see who we end up partnering with, and we'll see what Wattpad is doing, but it gives you a little bit of context on us and how I think of the space.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I think it's just astounding that your partner and the president of Semper8 Media has been able to come up with that many concepts.
Thank you, and so we're quite delighted because the concepts in Semper8 Media are both entertaining and thoughtful, and then to add to that, also original, very unusual, and it just speaks to her inquisitive and thoughtful and unusual thinking, which we're looking to bring to the masses by producing this content, and obviously help create some positive impact and also benefit from that impact.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you so much, Boris.
You're welcome, and thanks for the question. I see Olivia has her hand up.
Oh, hello. Yeah,
Hi, Olivia.
Hi. And as you mentioned before that, because entering the PE industry requires a bunch of different skills. And as we're a new graduate, I wonder whether we need to like accumulate more work experience before we enter in this industry.
So the question is, what are your best options? Meaning, if you're able to get into the industry you'd like to be in faster, that's great. If you're not, then how do you get there? And I think that conventionally, when the private equity industry was a little bit smaller than it is now, when it was a little bit more uniform, I would say that it would be very, very unlikely for somebody coming out of undergrad to get a starting position in that space. I think, admittedly, the industry is changing in that there is more different kinds of players in it, right? There's still the conventional fund managers with a limited life fund. There's fund managers with longer life funds. There's pension funds. There's different kinds of businesses that are wealth managers of different kinds that are going into it. There's folks like ourselves that are both advisors and investors. There's people who are family offices, who are wealthy families of different kinds, whether they have one business or a series of business, maybe in one generation, maybe multi-generational. They're getting into how do they make smart investments and smart impact. All of this to say that there's probably a little bit more opportunities now than there used to be, let's say 10 years ago, somebody coming out of undergrad. Certainly, it's still an extremely highly sought after industry. So yes, of course, when people have more experience, if it's the right kind of experience, then potentially they have the opportunity to be that much more attractive. But I guess what's important just in career management is for conventional paths, and let's say there's a conventional path within private equity that is a less conventional occupation, but the conventional path would be to get in with some experience, but not too much. Because if you have some, it's better than none. But if you have too much, then you might be too late, right? So I suppose it's figuring out what exactly do you need to get in. And these are the things that I mentioned, right? But what is the level of knowledge of those things that's needed? And do you need the appropriate prior experience to demonstrate those? But if you have too much experience, then maybe they don't view you as somebody who can do pieces anymore the way they want it, right? Maybe it's too late, right? So I think it's constantly being thoughtful about what it is, if that's the industry that you're targeting. It's constantly what do they want and need from a person at a certain level? Do you have that? If not, can you get onto the next level, right? And what would be some of the building blocks of analytical documentation, right? Communications that you can demonstrate to them that you might add enough value so that you might come into that that particular role. Does that make sense, Olivia?
Oh yeah, I still have like more a little more about it's like what kind of like positions and or industries are you looking for like maybe consulting or maybe like working in a bank or working in a pension fund, and what kind of job you think is you are looking for as a good candidate for the industry of PE?
Okay, well, conventionally what used to happen is private equity would hire people that have had some investment banking experience, meaning the experience of doing deals. Again, sort of raising money, right, to buying businesses, to managing businesses, to exiting. Well, raising money for funds is something that's pretty specific to people who have already experience in the industry, or just people who are extremely well connected with potential investors, right? So it's either you need it from within the industry, or somehow these are relationship people that have very strong family, professional, other relationships, right? So then for buying a company and exiting a company, these are M&A investment banking skills of going through a process of buying and selling. For operating and improving businesses, these are broadly speaking either operating skills, being in operating businesses and doing some things that are very impactful, now, or it's consulting skills, right? So those are the building blocks. So if one is to have the building blocks, and if one is to be of the right level of what they're looking for a particular role, you've got to merge those. And I think that's the answer, right? And then when there's a lot of people applying and there's a lot of competition, then the closer one is to what they're looking for, the more likely they're to take somebody. And then on the venture capital side, I think similarly, but a little bit more with a perspective on industry knowledge, i.e. venture capital is investing into earlier stage businesses. So let's say technology businesses, so healthcare businesses, maybe it would be beneficial to have somebody who is a master's in biochemistry, right? Or a PhD in physiology, or somebody who is a software engineer with some experience at, I don't know, let's say Google, Amazon, name any other company, right? And it would be helpful to better evaluate and do the evaluation of the early stage industries, but also the overseeing of the companies, right? So it's what are the pieces that plug in, and those are some of the pieces that plug in well, I think, for private equity and venture capital, Olivia.
Yeah, I see. And thank you so much for your suggestions. It's very helpful.
Okay, you're welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Glad. Sounds good.
Yep, I think it looks like everyone has had their answers and asked their questions. So I think our meeting, our event will be end here for today. And thank you, Boris, so much for joining us today and sharing your insight and experiences on the industry. And I think we all gained a lot and learned a lot about the industry, hearing from your answers. And I would also like to thank everyone for joining the event today, and stay close to our social media to keep updated on our new events. Thank you so much again for everyone for joining, and thank you, Boris.
Sounds great. You're welcome. And it was great to be here with you folks. I'm wishing you luck and success in your careers, and have a great rest of either morning or evening. I know that folks are on different sides of the world, different sides of the ocean.
Thank you, Boris.
Thank you.
You're welcome, folks. Bye-bye.